Right, thank you very much for coming. I gotta say, I'm really impressed. I think it was maybe a few weeks ago, we weren't sure how many people would show up. Then I'm sure you understand that what this really is about, a big part is looking at ownership of land, which is a really sensitive thing. I mean, somebody once told me that, you know, if you talk to an Englishman about land, it's like you're talking about his balls. It's really not something that you really can talk about. But still, it's like I think 150 people showed up, and that's amazing. I'm really, really impressed. Thanks for coming. Right, where was I going to start? Yes, why ownership of land? Why I'm really interested in that? Why is that important? So, for people my age and younger, and I'm really happy to see actually quite a lot of young people here, more than normally we see in these events. And the biggest problem, I think, is the housing situation. So a lot of us, you know, getting towards 40, and we realize that we were not going to be able to buy houses, and you know, we got a job, we're getting paid well, so we can't do the social housing, and it just seems that you're forever going to be stuck in rent, and the rents are just going to go up and up as we see them. So it's really scary. So what I propose doing is start with a little experiment to see not what the solutions for the housing crisis, and not even what the causes of the housing crisis, but what is the housing crisis? So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd like you to answer it, but if you have children who are 25 years old or older, I'd like you to answer on their behalf. You can just pick up any one of your children who's 25 or older. Can you please raise your hand if you don't own a house? That means you're either renting or you're paying mortgage. In that case, the bank owns your house. So, you know, I think, you know, that's quite a lot. I think more than 90%. Keep their hands up, keep their hands up. Okay? Now, I'd like you to keep your hands up if you're living rough on the street. Rough on the street. Okay. Rough. For the time being. Okay, so I've never done it with so many people, and it's good, nobody gets his hand. What can we learn from this? What is the housing crisis? Well, the housing crisis is not about not having enough houses, because we're all living in houses. There are enough houses. Okay? The housing crisis, as I see it, is just having too many landlords. Okay? Because we all live in houses, we're just paying a fortune to either a private landlord or to the bank, which is, you know, the financial institution are the biggest landlords everywhere. And I think that's important because, you know, when you look and finding solutions for the housing crisis, then it doesn't matter if you're buying, you know, if you're building on brownfields or green fields or up or wide and self-build or not self-build. Ultimately, we've got enough houses. So we need to look underneath it. The problem is underneath, and I think it's in ownership. I also want to say now that I have nothing personal about landlords, okay? My two best friends in town are landlords. One of them is my landlord. They're absolutely fantastic people. But there is a problem here, I would say, with landlordism. Okay? I was reading in the toilet down below, it says that there's interesting stuff there, go visit at the point. That I can't remember the years, but recently people are making more money, the wealth is coming more from the increase in the value of the house than in wages. And that leads to buy-to-let, you know? And people my age and younger can't compete with buy-to-let. It's just impossible. Anyway, I'll leave that. And my title for this talk, I'm talking about morality. Okay? So I want to just read something here. There was an English historian called Edward Gibbon, and I heard there's a little phrase that he said, history is indeed little more than the register of crimes, follies, and the misfortune of mankind. And you look at what's happening now, the world is getting worse and worse, it seems like, and this is madness. Middle East, Europe, everywhere. But there was another guy called Yeshaya Leibovich, who was a very, very good philosopher, less known, and he agreed with Edward Gibbon. He said, it's true, history is the register of all, you know, insanity that we're perpetuating. But history is also the struggle of men and women everywhere, in every generation, against these crimes, against these follies, against this insanity. against the horror. And that history is often not told, it's kind of left aside. You know, you can think about, I think about the anti-racist movements, the civil rights movement, women's rights, going backward 200 years, anti-slavery movement, which I think was a pivotal point in humanity. And these are all struggles against the horror that we are facing in history. And I'm really interested, what's in common for all these pivotal moments? You know, when people decided slavery is wrong. I think one thing, the most obvious thing, is all these movements were grassroots. You know, they were not people, you know, from the parliament or from the elites. They didn't perpetrate. It's people from the street. Okay? The other thing is, I think, that it's also to do with a change in or shift in the morality of humanity. I think before every big physical change, okay, emancipation, there's always something internal inside all the human being in the area. Something that we've been doing for a long time suddenly became actually a wrong thing. Suddenly, it was not right to own people. I was chatting to Emilio, yeah, and you know, he was, I think some people are a bit scared of the word morality. You know, it sounds like some kind of priest in a church. So there's, you know, maybe a better word is a conscience. That's something more internal inside us. And interesting, in Hebrew, the word conscience is matzpon. And in Hebrew, it's a root system, so each word has a certain root. And another word that's from the same root is safon, which is north. And another one similar to matzpon is matzpen. And matzpen is a compass. So your matzpon, your conscience, is like a compass that tells you not exactly where to go, but what is the direction that you like to go. And I think in all these moments of history where suddenly there was a big change, all these compasses in each one of us start moving, there was a shift. And when suddenly something is so obviously, understandably, became wrong, then the change happens. We can't just carry on that way. I hope we're nearing that moment. Right, I'd like to tell you a story now, also. A story that you know. About 500 years ago, people from this land, from this island, from the continent, were sailing on boats. They got onto boats, sailed across the Atlantic, and they got to the Americas, Central, South, and then North America. And they began committing the worst atrocities ever in humankind. The worst atrocities, nothing ever came close. I pick up some data. In the 17th century, 90% of the Native American population disappeared. Currently, now, it's estimated that there are 6 million Mayan people. That's in Mexico and the rest of the countries in Central America. 6 million. That's now. In the 15th century, before colonization, the number was also 6 million people. So it took them more than 500 years to go back to the number they were in the 15th century. 500 years to go back to the level of population. Now, I'm going to say something that might sound strange. The people who committed these horrible crimes were just people like you and me. Yes, there were some sadists that, that kind of were among them, but most of the people who killed and did all these crimes were just normal, and they had to do it. It sounds strange, but they were compelled to do that. They did not have any other choice, because in their heart, they carry an idea with them, an idea from their civilization, which is ownership of land. And I'll explain. Imagine well, we don't need to imagine, we're in this land here, okay? And the land is big, there's plenty of space. But the number of landowners is quite small. So another number that I picked up from the toilet was that 0.6% of the population owns 69% of the land, currently in the UK. So the landowners are a relatively small number. Now, apart from the landowners, there's also land users. Land users are all the rest of the people who use the land, and I completely agree with you. We all live on land, so land users are not farmers. We're all land users. We can't live without the land. Okay? That was not very clever. Sorry, Sam. Can I stop for a second?
Don't worry.
I do these foolish things sometimes. They always laugh in school as well. It made you laugh a bit. Okay. Cool. Where was I? Yeah. So land users, there are a lot of land users. So, you know, a little bit of maths, not a lot of maths, but you know what the fraction is. You know, you've got 2 divided by 15. So imagine this fraction is the number of land users, or land owners at the top, divided by the number of users. Land owners divided by land users. That's a small number. It's going to be definitely a number smaller than 1. Very, very small, because there's much more land users, land owners. Now then imagine the population grows. There's more people. Okay, so there's maybe a few more land owners, but there's many, many, many more land users. So the competition to use the land is getting worse and worse and worse. The rent is going up. This is kind of what we're experiencing, not so much from population growth, but for other things we don't need to talk to now. But so that fraction that was very small becomes even smaller and smaller and smaller, getting closer and closer and closer to zero. And you know, they can probably come up with some kind of equation to say that the smaller that number is, the stronger, the bigger the pressure on the society becomes. And we're experiencing it now. And we can see that the pressure on society is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and more and more dangerous. Pressure that can just blow up. Somebody told me the fabric of society. Can blow it up. And there's only 2 ways to diffuse that pressure. One of them is through a land reform, serious land reform, revolution. This is what all peasant revolutions were always about. The other way to diffuse that pressure, which has been done again and again and again and again and again, is to take men and then women and put them on boats and sail across the seas and find more land. We need more land. We always need more land, like we need to build more houses. That's the only way. Not the only way, that's the way that we've been diffusing that pressure again and again and again and again. So colonization comes from land ownership. Now, the genocide of the Native American people is not the only crime. The other crime that we were responsible as well is for slavery. Slavery was not a new thing. It's been going on for thousands of years. But over a couple of hundred years, 12 million people were taken from Africa, and 10 million managed to make it to the Americas. 2 million perished on the way. There was never ever an operation, a slavery operation, slaving operation in the history of humankind. The systematic, the amount of money that came to support this, never on this scale. And like I said before, 200 years ago, some people, I don't know how they did that, but they just decided suddenly that it's wrong to own people. It's just wrong. And through a lot of fighting, they actually managed to abolish that concept of ownership of people. Now, I personally think that ownership of people is very much related to ownership of land. For example, if, you know, I'm not the Duke of Somerset or something, I just own this. Let's say I own this 2 meters square. This is mine. And now let's say I've got another place, so I stay there. So somebody else's life depends on this. Somebody come in here and he needs it. Maybe just sleep there, maybe to do some work, get something out of the land. His life depends on it. If I own this land that he uses, then surely I own him, or part of it. You know, for us people who rent and pay mortgage, the amount, we are pretty much between 30 to 50% of us is owned by our landlords. That's the amount of money that that's the amount of labor that we are extracted, and the labor that extracted from us. Between 30 to 50%. If you go to other places like in London, it's probably more. I'm quite lucky, I think it's just about 40%. I'm really lucky that way. So land ownership necessarily leads to human ownership. This is what I think. And just like we had 200 years ago, a movement, an anti-slavery movement, perhaps, okay, we are seeing some signs, you know, and this is probably one more thing that might eventually give birth to a child of the anti-slavery movement, which is going to be a land movement. It's going to look honestly into what ownership means. Ownership of land. Now that's all depressing, okay? But there is good news, okay? And when the Europeans came to the Americas, they encountered I don't know too much, I'm just recently started learning about the sophistication and the wisdom of the Native American culture, civilization, probably the most sophisticated and the wisest civilization ever on the planet. And some of these ideas are starting coming back to us across the Atlantic, not through boats, but these ideas are filtering back to Europe. So there is hope. And I'll just like to read to you. I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with Chief Seattle's speech. This is one version, probably not the original one, but it's a good one. It's a good one. The president in Washington sends us word that he wishes to buy our land. This is Chief Seattle. But how can you buy or sell the sky, the land? The idea is strange to us. If we don't own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of the earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect. All are holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are part of the earth and it is part of us. So if we sell our land, you must keep it apart and sacred, as a place where man can go to taste the wind that is sweetened by the meadow flowers. Will you teach your children what we have taught our children? That the earth is our mother? What befalls the earth befalls all the sons of the earth. This we know. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. So I know there's a lot of people who in town agree with that. They feel that. What I don't know is how many people are actually thinking what ownership of land means. I can't see these two things come together. I can't see the earth is our mother sits together with the ownership of land. I can't see how we belong to the land. How does that sit together with ownership of land? There's one more thing. I was talking about that to my wife a few days ago, and she said, look, people can understand that, grabbing land from somebody, conquering land in America, or maybe William the Conqueror coming here, taking land, enclosure. These are wrong things. But if somebody worked for 30 years, paying a mortgage for a small bit of land underneath his house or in the countryside, how can you tell if it's not his? How's that possible? And I completely understand that. It's a really, really, really good argument. And I don't have an easy answer. But what I can say is that the same question was posed by the slave owners. Okay, so slave owners in the 19th century in America were saying, I know it's wrong to kidnap these people from Africa, but I've worked very hard, some people, they worked very hard to accumulate their wealth and to buy these slaves, to work in the plantation. If you take them away from me, I've got nothing. This wealth I accumulate is not just for myself, it's for my family, and I'm supporting charity and everything. How can I didn't snatch it from them. I bought it, I paid a lot of money for these slaves. I didn't take them from Africa. So, it's kind of, in a way, it's a bit similar. And the people answered, these slave owners said, okay, so it's a wrong thing to take slaves, people from Africa, steal them from Africa. It's wrong to snatch land, to do highland clearances. That's wrong. So how many purchases and sales of land does it take to take this wrong thing and turn it into right things? How many times do you need to buy and sell the land until that's fine? Is it one time? If the one person buys land from somebody who stole that land, does that make it all right? Or is it two purchases? Is it 3? Is it 10? Is it 20? I don't know. This is something that our moral compass needs to decide. And it's not up to me, it's up to all of us, isn't it? I'd like to end with a prayer, actually. No, actually, before, one more thing. There's one more thing, okay, so if the land doesn't belong to any of us, which is kind of what I think, still the question remains, how do we share it? We still need to find a way to share it. And this is really what this day is about, personally. First of all, to understand the problem of ownership, but then to try and come up with some kind of alternative. So I'm not going to propose any solution. I'm going to give a challenge for the other speakers to come with some kind of solutions. But there was, I was introduced to a little saying when I was talking to people about a friend called Adriana, and she taught me the saying in Spanish, and it goes, "La tierra es de quien la trabaja con sus manos," which I think is attributed to Emilio Zapata, who said basically the land belongs to the person who works it with his own hands. That makes sense to me. How do we go about that? I don't know. So that brings me to the end. I'd just like to end with a little prayer. And it is a prayer because in my mind, every being in this world, living or non-living, has a spiritual in instance. And when we find a relationship between people and places, it's a spiritual relationship. And my prayer is basically just one word, which I also learned just a month ago, and it's called Satyagraha. Satyagraha. Anyone heard of it? Yeah, I've never heard of it before. It's a word made up by Mahatma Gandhi. It's made out of two words, Satya, which means truth, and Graha, which means insistent, firm insistence. And he came up with that word when he basically got tired of passive resistance. He didn't like that. He thought passive resistance is a weapon for the weak. He was looking for something with a bit more essence, something a bit more deep, something a bit more spiritual. So I pray that we will be Satyagraha today, that we will have the honesty to find the truth. What does ownership mean? And then we have courage to pursue it, to get the conclusion and to think about how can we fix that. And who knows, maybe this little event in some way will be a little stepping stone into some kind of birth of a land movement of people who would dare to imagine that there is another way, there is a way to share this earth in a just way. Thank you.